Good afternoon and welcome to today's Personnel Today webinar, brought to you in association with Skillsoft. The way we learn is changing. We live in what is arguably the most significant period of change in the way in which human beings develop new skills. Online videos, MOOCs, and learning over social media are just three examples of learning methods that not long ago did not even exist. But how is this affecting employers and their staff, and what is the role of the Learning and Development Department? How is it changing, and how should L&D professionals empower their employees to learn in ways that suit both them as individuals and the organisation as a whole? Well, answering these questions, I am delighted to welcome Jane Hart, a speaker and author of texts on modern approaches to workplace learning, and the founder of the Centre for Learning and Performance Technologies. Jane has been advising businesses for more than 25 years, focusing on helping them modernise their approach to workplace learning and to create more relevant development initiatives. In a moment, I'll hand over to Jane, who will present for around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have a live Q&A discussion, and that will be fed by questions from you in the audience. Submit your questions at any time via the chat pane, and we will address them at the end, unless there's anything particularly pressing, in which case I will ask Jane to clarify. Okay, we're aiming to be finished no later than 3 o'clock, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Jane Hart. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. It's great to see so many people in the participant list, and I recognize quite a few names there, so hello to all of you. And as you said, Rob, this is a very interesting new topic, really, and I think one that's going to become increasingly important over the coming years. So during today's session, what I want to cover is to look at the rationale and the case for what I'm calling employee-led learning. And I'm going to do that by starting off by considering 5 factors that I think are impacting the workplace today and what this means for a new role for learning and development in the workplace. And then I'm going to spend probably the most of the time looking at that new role of learning and development, and by considering 10 practical ways that you might consider to empower employee-led learning. And I'm going to take a lot of this material from my recent book, which is called Learning in the Modern Workplace. And at the end of this session, if you're interested, I'll give you the link where you can find out more about it. So let's get started. And as I said, going to start by thinking about the case for employee-led learning. And what I'd like to do is start by giving you a quote from an article that appeared in TechCrunch last year by Carl Mester. And he said, quote, "If you're an employee on Henry Fonda's assembly line in Detroit in the 1920s, you received a high degree of training and preparation before you ever set foot in the factory. You learned what your role was and were given all the tools you needed to accomplish your job from day one. From then on, your role never changed. You did your part to move the product forward along the assembly line from the day you began until the day you retired 40 or 50 years later. Since those days, the business world has transformed, but the workforce training process hasn't kept up with the pace of change." End quote. I think Carl has pretty much summarized the situation that we're seeing today. And like Carl and many others, really, I think this means we now need to adopt brand new practices to support learning in today's workplace. So I'm going to start by looking at the 5 factors that are impacting the workplace and I think are driving this new approach to workplace learning. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the effects of digitization on the workplace, and this quote from Microsoft, for instance, I think summarizes it well. The exponential growth of digital connectivity, devices and information is driving profound changes in the way we work all around the world. But this digitization involves much more than converting paper-based or offline processes into online processes. And in workplace learning terms, it actually involves much more than just, say, converting classroom training into e-learning. Or as Microsoft goes on to say, in order to survive in this world, companies need to rethink everything from culture to tools and environments. And again, this means that L&D too needs to rethink their whole approach to workplace learning, their culture, their tools, and their environments, by adopting what I think is a new modern understanding of what it means to learn at work today. And I think the second factor I want to consider gives us some clues as to what this might look like. Now, it's increasingly clear from many pieces of evidence that learning habits are changing. Individuals no longer rely on being trained as the only way to learn for work. Many appreciate they learn as they do their work, as well as through their interaction with their colleagues, their manager, maybe even a coach. You can see those things listed on the left. But they also make significant use of the web, not just to access online courses, but also a variety of sources in different formats, particularly video, as well as to build their professional networks or connections from around the world on social networks like Twitter and LinkedIn and so forth. And in doing so, they often bypass learning and development to solve their learning and performance problems much more quickly and more easily. And for L&D, this therefore means not trying to maintain that role of learning gatekeeper, nor does it mean trying to be the learning police, banning access to anything that hasn't been created by them. I also think it means that beliefs like our people don't know what to learn or we can't trust them to learn the right things just aren't appropriate anymore. This we know best attitude is really not up to it. And in fact, Towards Maturity's Learn a Voice report showed that employees like to be in charge of how they learn, with 91% wanting to learn at their own pace and 82% knowing what they need to learn in order to do their job. And Laura Overton, founder of Towards Maturity, commented on the report and said, the message is clear. L&D teams must adapt to the needs of colleagues rather than force them to do what L&D wants them to do. So L&D needs to embrace these changing learning habits. But it doesn't just mean creating modern resources in ways that are more consistent with the way people learn on the web, although that will be part of it. It means actively encouraging and supporting individuals to find their own solutions to their learning performance problems in the ways that suit them best. And I think this is going to be important for the next reason. We're now seeing a multi-generational workforce. 4 generations in the workplace for the very first time. And much has been written about the different attitudes to work and learning of each of these generations, in particular their exposure and use of new technologies. But I think rather than stereotyping people on generational grounds, assuming that a baby boomer will have no interest or experience in social media, whilst a millennial will be a fully web-savvy person, or that a baby boomer will prefer a classroom course whilst a millennial will prefer to watch a YouTube video. I think what needs to be recognized is that everyone is different and that a one-size-fits-all sheep-stick approach to training is just no longer appropriate. Once again, this doesn't mean creating resources in multiple formats to ensure everyone's preferences are met. That's a pretty impossible task, but rather supporting flexibility and autonomy so that individuals can construct their own learning experiences that suit them best. And there's another good reason for this approach too. We're now living in an era of exponential information growth. Huge amounts of data are being created every day. And what's more, the half-life of a piece of knowledge today is just around 5 years. In other words, knowledge is decaying and skills are going out of date very quickly. In fact, it's been said that a college degree will be out of date before the loan is paid off. So whereas in the past, as we've just seen, individuals were trained to do their jobs once and this would last them their whole careers, Over time, as job roles became more sophisticated or new technology or procedures were introduced, training became a full-time operation to keep people knowledgeable, skilled, and up-to-date. But this doesn't mean L&D needs to work even harder, creating even more content. There's a finite amount L&D can do, but it means adopting a new approach, one that comes from not trying to do it all themselves and control it all, but recognizing that everyone needs to be constantly keeping themselves up to date, learning and developing new skills and expertise in the ways that suit them best, encouraged and supported by line managers and learning development partners. So as I said, learning development's role won't be to create more stuff, but focus on helping people with the new skills many will need to have to learn for themselves. And there is, of course, another influence on this as well. We're seeing the emergence of the gig economy. You know, that is an environment where temporary positions are just commonplace. That means there's no longer such a thing as a job for life. In fact, for most individuals, this means they're going to have a life of jobs. And one estimate is that current students will have more than 10 jobs by the time they're 38. And companies are going to see a growing contingent workforce made up of freelancers, independent professionals, and temporary contract workers. In fact, research from Ernst & Young shows that 2 in 5 organizations expect to increase their use of the contingent workforce by 2020. This means that people are going to be recruited with the skills to do a job, not recruited and then trained to do a job. So if employees want to stay in a company, they'll therefore need to keep their skills up to date themselves. But in fact, supporting individuals to do just that will actually be beneficial for the organization as it will reduce the costs of recruitment. So this means helping individuals organize and manage their own professional self-development in line with organizational objectives to achieve new levels of performance. And all of this introduction here, I think, means that we need a new approach to workplace learning. One that focuses on the individual and how they learn at work. And one that I call modern workplace learning. It means doing things differently and doing different things. So as I said, it's not just about providing modern training, designing and delivering modern content and learning experiences, but it's also about supporting manager-led learning, working with managers to help them value and support everyday learning, both individually and in work teams and groups. And it also means empowering employee-led learning, helping individuals take responsibility for their own continuous self-development and sharing those experiences so the organization can benefit from them too. As I said, this is all very new work. We focus a lot on the training division. We're moving more into sort of supporting manager-led learning, but now I think we really need to broaden out and think about employee-led learning. So I just have a first poll here to ask you a quick question. Based on the very minimal of information that I've given you today, how much time are you spending on what might be considered empowering employee-led learning? So Rob, I'll hand it over to you so that you can work on that poll.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Right, so how much time do you currently spend on empowering employee-led learning? There are 4 options. None of the time, some of my time, a lot of my time, or all of my time. Simply click the radio button next to the line that you most agree with and submit, and we can take a look at the responses from the audience. We've got around 150 of you dialed in, so I can see that a lot of you have voted already. We'll just give that another 10 seconds or so to get as many responses as possible. Okay, that's great. Okay, so looks like we've got 99 responses, and there are the results. So the vast majority saying that some of my time is spent on empowering employee-led learning. Jane, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Well, that's interesting. So in particular, people believe that they're doing it some of the time. Interesting, though, that nobody's spending all of their time on it. and a few people none of the time, and like 10% of them. Well, we'll have a look at some thoughts about what it might mean to you as we go through the rest of this presentation. But I just wanted to show you, give you a summary really of what I think modern workplace learning means, comparing it to maybe a traditional culture. And I think that this means a number of different things. I think in this modern workplace, we need the responsibility transferred from, exclusively L&D's responsibility, someone who designs and delivers and manages training, to everyone's responsibility who takes an active part in supporting their own learning, and managers taking an active part in supporting their team's learning, and so forth. And the definition of learning needs to move from being primarily training to work-wide learning, which recognizes that learning happens in many different contexts. Learning's relationship to work changes. It moves from one that considers it's learning, then work, in other words, you train somebody before they do a job, to just learning for, at, and through work in many different ways. And the learner experience moves from this sort of one-size-fits-all cheap-dip approach to a more personal, personally created one, which is relevant and appropriate for any individual. Learning metrics move from those focusing on activity to those that move activity, including things like course attendance or completion figures, to ones that focus on performance, what changes or new performance are we seeing as a result of learning. And the L&D service then moves from a command and control service focused on organizing and managing learning to one that enables and supports all these different ways of learning. And for me, one of the key things is about letting go. It's about helping people rather than telling people what to do. And the focus moves from content development to skills development, particularly the skills to develop self-organized, continuous learners. And I think this new culture of learning is beginning to take place, but it's obviously not going to happen overnight. But I want you to look at now some of the steps that you might take, some of the ways forward you might go think about considering to do, to move towards a culture which is more about empowering employees to organize and manage much more of their learning. And clearly, in the time available, I'm not going to be able to go into any of these in enormous detail. If you are interested in following any of these up, then I've written quite a lot about each one of these in my book. So, I'll give you the link to that at the end. But I just want to briefly highlight, I think, some of the ways that we can change from just sitting there creating content to actually beginning to empower individuals in the workplace. And I think it really starts off by working in managers to help them see the value, because the managers are actually going to be the key to it all. They're going to be the key to building a new learning mindset, and it will mean them helping them to understand and promote this in their teams. And of course, traditionally, many managers think that the responsibility for learning lies with the L&D department. So if they have a problem, they just phone them up and order a course. But they need to recognize and value much more the learning that takes place every day as people do their jobs. So, and it also means helping managers themselves have a continuous learning mindset, showing them how they can role model this, demonstrate how they're continuous learners, and also that they're going to reward continuous learning. And that's going to be key if they want this new behavior to take place. Now, I think in these early days, it's going to be a matter of sitting down with managers and having those one-to-one conversations. It's not going to be something you're going to want to force every manager to do. There'll be many that are sympathetic and supportive to this new approach, and they're the people would want to start to work with. One certainly wants to start, with those who are resistant to new ideas. You can deal with them later. So find the people who are going to work with you, who understand this new way of learning. And your role then is going to be much more advisory and supportive rather than order takers. And of course, part of that advice is, well, what can they do to start to put this practically into operation? And I think one of the first things that they can do is to think about recruiting for what's called learnability. Now, we've seen that what are needed are employees who take responsibility for driving their own continuous development. That's employees who think about skills they need to develop now and in the future. And for a number of forward-looking organizations, continuous learning does lie at the center of their company culture. So companies like Google and Ernst & Young, for example, are now looking for learnability when recruiting employees. And Eric Schmidt from Google, for instance, is actually looking for learning animals, people who are naturally curious and inquisitive and who are generally interested in acquiring new knowledge. So whilst most interviews are competency-based, assessing what the individual can do now, I think one way forward is to focus more on learnability, asking the individual what he or she is doing to keep up to date and what evidence they have to demonstrate this. So by employing learning animals, that's those who have high learnability skills, will mean that they're going to be far less reliant on being spoon-fed training, and they're able to do much more for themselves. I'm wondering if any of your organizations you are recruiting for learnability, and if so, what kind of questions you're asking. Be interesting to hear if you put those in the chat. And of course, when it comes to existing employees, particularly those who currently don't exhibit high levels of learnability, it's been about helping them to understand the value of continuous learning. You know, many of the people will probably expect their company to teach them any new skill they need to have to do their job. But they're going to need to understand that this situation is not going to persist forever, and that means taking some more responsibility for themselves. In particular, it means explaining what's in it for me. You know, that continuous self-development is not just something for the organization's sake, but for their own sake too. In other words, to stay employable, marketable, they will need to demonstrate their continuously learning. And in doing so in the organization, they'll also be rewarded for it by continued employment or even promotion. So the role here will be about nurturing and supporting individuals to feel that they can take on this new idea of continuous learning. And one of the ways that you can start with that, the simple way, is to help employees learn from their everyday work experiences. And I think most people recognize now that this happens all the time. Sometimes it's conscious experience, you know, they're aware that they're learning something. Other times it can happen subconsciously, they're not even aware of it. But of course, as you know, learning from experience is regarded as very important. But John Dewey said, actually, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And for individuals, teams, organizations, how much we learn from our past is critical for our improvement and future success. So it's not a matter of just encouraging people to be aware of their daily experiences, but to reflect on what they've learned from them too. And as I'm sure you're all aware, whilst reflective practice is an important activity for many professionals, it's not actually found in many workplaces. And whilst it's true that many people do take the time to sort of think about their day, Charles Jennings points out reflective practice itself doesn't just happen. It's a learned process. It requires some degree of self-awareness and the ability to critically evaluate experiences, actions, and results. So Charles suggests that the good starting point for embedding reflection into daily workflow, and the way to do that is to think about it at two levels: individual reflection and then reflection with colleagues and team members. So I think one of the ways that you could start is by working with a manager to explore these two levels of reflection and how you can help him or her to embed them into the working day. So, for example, an individual might spend 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the day writing up their reflections on their day's experiences. And I think there's a good role here to help build as well as maintain this new habit. It's not something that's just going to happen by itself. And when it comes to collective reflection, the manager will need to be encouraged to share, that the team shares ideas, experiences, successes and failures with one another. And I'll talk a bit about that later. So just another example. I think also when we begin to empower employee-led learning, one big piece of the picture involves building new skills. And as I showed you earlier, modern professionals learn in many different ways, in different contexts, particularly on the web. But in order for any individual to learn effectively in this new world of learning, they need a new set of learning skills. And that's not just about how to study online or where to find courses, but these other things that I've highlighted on this slide here. How to build and maintain a professional network. How to get the most out of online groups and other communities. How to participate in professional events and particular online conferences and other live events and get the most out of them. And how to locate and subscribe to what I call knowledge flows, constant drip feeds of information coming through things like blogs and news feeds. But at the same time, avoid information overload and as well connect the dots between the random pieces of information that they're receiving, as well as how to find, validate, and use external resources. So I think there is going to be a big push here towards helping people with building these new skills. And this is going to be key, but I think it's not going to come not through creating maybe more e-learning courses, but by using modern approaches to do that. For example, things like running a learning campaign to expose them to new ideas, using a variety of resources that individuals can tap into as appropriate, or tasks and challenges for them to work on things they don't already know. And again, picking the things that they need to work on, not telling them they have to do it a very prescribed way. Might even involve small group learning to share ideas and experiences. But in order to make the most out of the new world of learning, many people are going to need to acquire these new skills. But, simply encouraging self-organized learning isn't going to be enough to really change the organizational culture. I think to do that, it means making sure that self-organized learning is a key part of your organizational learning strategy. And I think this means a number of things to do that effectively. It involves individuals creating their own employee development plans, where they set their own professional goals, as I said, aligned with job, team, and organizational objectives. So they're thinking about where their new roles and skills are going to lead and the skills they're going to need to continue in those jobs. It involves helping them to identify the resources and activities or people that best suit them to achieve their goals, perhaps with a focus on using more free web-based resources rather than doing it in a prescribed way. It means them recording and evidencing their own progress and performance themselves rather than centrally. It means sharing development plans as well as significant learning and achievements to enable the organization to benefit from the new knowledge and skills. But along with this, what also will be required is some sort of provision of protected learning time. When it comes to learning, as we know, many people have good intentions about the things they're going to do, but then the demands of a day job kick in. So I think if an organization truly believes in continuous learning, that really is at the core of their philosophy, it means giving people time to do it. So for instance, if an organization offers, say, just 30 minutes protected time a day for an individual to work on their goals, this would ensure that individuals see learning as a continuous process and the value of it for the organization and for themselves. And it also be important for them to manage their own time, decide when they spend that daily quota of time or build it up during the week to provide the utmost flexibility. And actually, if you think about it, just 30 minutes a day over a year adds up to around 100 learning hours, which is equivalent to about 12 conventional training days. So it really is a very powerful way of helping people learn in the way that they want to do it themselves. So I think there is a great role here to help to set up and assist individuals and managers with their self-organized and self-managed learning. It's not something that just they'll have to get on and do on their own. There's a big opportunity to get stuck in and help in this area. And alongside this, I think it also means promoting personal learning systems. Now, the LMS has for quite a while now been seen as the primary system in organizations to track and manage employee learning centrally. And whereas an LMS still has an important part to play in recording and tracking maybe mandatory and compliance training, I don't believe it's appropriate to try and track everything everyone learns. What's much more appropriate is for an individual to establish their own personal learning systems where they own their own learning and maintain perhaps a portfolio of evidence. Now, there are only a few systems on the market at the moment that do this kind of thing, and for those people with high learnability skills, what they tend to use are tools like OneNote or Evernote to capture reflections. But I just wanted to mention one platform that I've seen that does offer this functionality, and that's something called PebblePad. And what it does, it offers the ability to an individual to create a privately controlled personal learning space. But more than this, it provides a whole set of templates to support an individual's learning. So an action plan for setting professional goals, a structured reflective template for recording and reflecting experiences, wherever they happen, in the classroom, online, in a conference, wherever it may be. And there's also this mobile app, which makes it very easy for individuals to use those templates to record their experiences or take photos or whatever on the go, which they can then send back to their personal learning space. And everything by default is private to them, although they can share it with whoever they want to, their managers, other people, their network, or whoever it might be. But I think, employing some sort of system like this or encouraging a system like this does actually mean and bring a number of advantages. First of all, it sets a clear message about the importance of individually controlled, self-organized learning. And it puts that personal space right at the center of organizational development. And it ensures that learning is integrated from beyond the workplace. And it moves that focus away from tracking activity to tracking performance changes by the managers. And actually, when you look at PebblePad, it's actually a win-win for both the organization and the individual, because the individual's space is portable, so it can actually detach from one organization and reattach to another. So that means the individual can continue to build on their professional development as they move from job to job. And the organization can therefore benefit from the wealth of experience that the employees are building over time. But it is a big new mindset change, I think, to adopt something like this. So I'll be interested to see if anybody is thinking of doing something like this, because it means a real rethink of those tools that learning technologies are all about. And of course, ultimately, it's not just about employees doing things themselves. It's about sharing what they've learned with their work teams and even the wider organization. And I think there's a big role here to help a team do this so they can learn from one another as a natural part of everyday working. Of course, it requires good social skills to help a team do this. It's not a matter of just telling people to be social, but actually showing them what it means to be social. It means perhaps working with small groups, helping them consider what to share, how to add value, and how to avoid oversharing. and generally understand the importance of sharing in terms of not only their own self-development, but the development of the team. And I think, as I said, there is a good opportunity for L&D professionals to move into these more facilitative roles, supporting building of experiences across the whole team. And I think you can go even wider than that, because sharing, you have a role to sharing more widely in the organization by facilitating what I call show your work events. And once you've established this self-organized learning culture, there's now this big opportunity to bring people together, or at least to coordinate the bringing of people together, to share their work, which would probably be the outcome of some professional, self-organized professional development initiatives, networking sessions. So they're not just confined to their own teams, but they could be done in more informal situations, sharing with the rest of the organization. And maybe they could be done in the form of more networking types of activities, where people might do lightning talks or speed geeking events, or perhaps even facilitating larger events like company unconferences where individuals can share and discuss their work in more informal ways. I think this shows that it's not, as I say, it's not about just the individual learning from him or herself, but actually helping the organization benefit from this much wider experiences that now everybody is having. But finally, I suppose, if you want to establish employee-led learning, then there's going to be another opportunity to respond to specific needs. And this is why I think that there is an opportunity to create what I call a learning help desk or a learning concierge service. And what this modern learning help desk service will do is provide a bespoke service to employees to help them with a wide range of learning and performance issues. And I think this is be staffed more by skilled learning advisors. So they're going to have roles that will do things like this. They are going to help individual employees address those ad hoc performance problems, those individual ones, which perhaps would traditionally be solved by sending them on a course, but helping to understand what would best suit them to do in the context of their work. It'd be helping them set up those employee development plans, helping them diagnose their own learning needs, or considering where their job might lead in the future and what new skills they're going to need to keep up to date with their jobs. It'd be about helping them set their professional goals in line with business goals. It'd be about helping them understand their own learning preferences and determining what learning strategies and resources best suit them. It'd be about identifying new ways to evidence performance. So how can I show what I can now do? It won't be a matter of showing what I've learned, but what I can do now as a result of my self-development. And it'd also be dealing with any issues that people kind of work through their own personal goals. And L&D, therefore, their activities won't be judged on the number of people they put through courses or booked onto e-learning courses or whatever it is, but it will be judged on the success of how self-organized learning converts into improvements in job, team, and organizational performance. So I've really covered an awful lot of stuff here. I'm seeing this happening in organizations around the world in different ways. I'm wondering how you are interested in this new work. And so my last call, really, I'd be interested to see now, based on some of the ideas I've talked about this afternoon, how much time would you like to spend on this kind of activity? Not what you currently spend, but how much you'd like to spend. Rob, do you want to?
Indeed, thank you, Jane. Lots of questions coming in as well, and I can see that People are voting in the poll already. So this is how much time you would like to spend on empowering employee-led learning. And I'm pleased to see that so far no one has voted for none of my time. But yeah, we've got most people having voted now, so I'll just give it a few more seconds and then we'll have a look. Okay, there we go. So, James, a lot of people saying a lot of my time, about 60%, 9% or so saying all of my time. Back to you.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, I'm okay. Well, I jotted down the figures from the first poll, which was how much you currently spend, and the big one was 71% on some of the time, and that's dropped down now to about 31%. So it moved up to like 60% now. I'd like to spend a lot of my time on this. So I think this is great news because it shows there is the interest and desire to move on into that. And whereas before nobody said they spent all of their time on it, 8% are actually considering spending all of their time on it. So I think that does show that many people here on the call at least recognize the importance and value of it and want to spend more time on it. So I think that's jolly good news because, as I said, it's not about trying to do everything all at once, but at least if you have the interest and desire to move things in those directions, we're actually all going to be working together in the right place. So before I hand over to you for some Q&A then, Rob, I'll just pop up on the screen the link to my book if anybody's interested to look at it further. I know, looking at the participant list, there are a number of people have got it already, but if you haven't, if you go through that link, you can find more about it. And as I said, I've covered very briefly here some of the sort of high-level things that I think it means, moving away from creating stuff to much more supporting managers, supporting individuals in very different ways. And of course, something that I've not really been able to talk about is actually what it means for skills of the L&D profession and what the implications are for everybody concerned. So I'm suspecting that those are going to come up in the questions. But so I'll hand it over to you now then to pick up any questions that you've spotted.
Thank you, Jane, and really great talk, full of lots of practical tips as well. And we've got at least 20 questions or 20 comments. I did prompt people to try and think of blockers, the sort of things that might be stopping them from doing some of the things that you were talking about. So we've got quite a few ideas there in terms of the things that get in the way. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the questions, and I'll go back to one of the early questions. And I guess, obviously that some of these questions overlap, but Julia was one of the first people to point out around the fact that people in her organisation still expect to be spoon-fed. I'm sure you've come across this before, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Well, obviously, that there, as I said earlier, that many people do expect that to come into the organisation and be expected to be trained to do their jobs. But there are also a lot of people who don't necessarily need to be spoon-fed, and perhaps a good place to start is exactly with those people, perhaps making this a more voluntary activity to start with, not forcing it upon everybody. I don't think forcing anything on anybody works very well, but opening it up to people who want to do this. And as I say, if you're going to reward these kind of activities, then other people will see the benefits, because as those people remain in the organisation or promoted in the organisation because they are doing much more for themselves, I think it sends out a message to those who just want to be spoon-fed. So there will be obviously a need to continue to spoon-feed certain individuals, but I'm sure there are many others who you could just find and tap into those and get them as your champions, if you like, and certainly managers to support these activities. It's not going to be able to change everybody's mindsets overnight, but you need to start with the people who want to work with you in these kind of areas.
Okay, great. I guess that touches on a few of the other questions that come in around how you encourage managers to take this seriously, and not just managers, but also sort of the senior leadership team. I mean, would you recommend a sort of launch of an activity that you put out on the intranet and on email to try to encourage people to start to think differently, almost like a campaign?
I think it's going to be a number of different activities. I think it's going to be just in the first instance, just talking to people, talking to managers, finding those managers who do see the future as differently. There are certainly many that still think that's L&D's job. I just want to order courses from them. As I said, over time, they, just like the individuals who want to be spoon-fed, will change as well. But tap into the ones who want to, who do see things differently, who do understand the value of this. We're not having to try and convince all these people. There are so many people out there that think like this. It's just, I think more L&D thinks that there's a problem out there that isn't as big a problem as perhaps you can see, but you just need to find the people who really do things differently and work with them. Don't make it a great big sort of push. Keep it fairly sort of quiet, and in my experience, it spreads much more virally when people are doing things quietly under the radar rather than seeing this as a new initiative or we're going to force everybody to do it. That just really doesn't work. So I think it's about finding the managers and helping them with their teams and sending the individuals. So there's a whole different lot of activities you can do. And you can also do a much more of a campaign to support learning as you're going. So it's going to be a number of activities that can be undertaken to support this. But
okay.
I very much thank you.
Kerry raises a point, and I guess this relates to the trend that we read about where people are perhaps moving away from annual appraisals and towards more regular performance check-ins and review conversations, and how that kind of relates to employee-led learning. The two to me seem to kind of fit together quite well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Yes, I think it's going to be, what are your performance problems and how could you best solve them? And perhaps L&D might give you some advice. Many people are doing this already. They have a problem, they go out and they solve it for themselves. But perhaps those who need more help, that's when L&D might be able to provide a more learning advisory role to support these. And, it's not about just going on a course, but understanding how those individuals perhaps prefer to work on issues, whether they want to do it on their own, or whether they do it with others, or they want to do it in face-to-face situations or online, understanding some of their needs as well as their preferences, rather than just sort of giving them a sort of one-size-fits-all solution to anything. So, but certainly it's much more about performance, addressing individual performance problems rather than sort of very generic performance problems.
Okay. You mentioned fairly early on about the shortening half-life of knowledge, and that kind of got me thinking about the sort of modern equivalent of training needs analysis, and how do companies ensure that their staff are learning about the new things that they need to be learning about quickly?
Well, as I say, I think it's not about it having to happen top down. I think people are doing this for themselves. There are many people out there keeping abreast of what's happening in L&D or marketing or whatever it is. And it's just about helping those people bring those ideas in and share them, and so others recognize them. And really supporting those people who are doing just that, seeing them as really important personnel in the organization, rather than sort of this top-down, you must do this and we'll tell you what you have to learn. So it really flips it around so that it becomes much more of a individual and sharing initiative, rather than a sort of L&D telling you what to keep up on. If people do have difficulties understanding what they need to do, I think that this is when it comes into understanding what these new skills are for the future, how they can best go out and find out what's happening in their industry or their profession. and a lot of people are doing this already. We're just not giving them the credit for them, or in many cases, they're being banned from doing it, or they're certainly not encouraged to do it. So I think it's simply just changing our whole approach that, what you're doing is very valuable. Just bring it in and share it with us all.
Okay, perfect. When you were talking about reflective practice, we had a little flurry of comments come in including from Heather, around time, and I'm sure this is one that you hear a lot. I mean, how do you recommend people find the time to dedicate to learning?
Well, that's good. I mean, as you saw that I said, I think if the organisation sees continuous learning as a key part of their philosophy, a core part of their activities, which I'm seeing many organisations now, they've got to put their money where their mouth is and give time to these kind of things. And if people are just going to have to do this in their own time, it's not going to happen. So by providing sort of protected time, as I said, on one point, this is the way to do it. Even if it's just half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, it can make a big difference over time. Even if it's just 10 minutes to sit down and write up your experiences and share them with the group, those 10 minutes are actually very valuable 10 minutes. So I think if, as I say, I repeat yet again, that if organisations see this as key, and it's up to perhaps learning and development people to help managers see this as key, then they need to provide the time to do it and not expect it to have to happen as an extra to their job. And of course, yes, the day job, takes over, and you think about, I haven't got time to do it today. But there's a lot of people who, once they've got into the habit of doing these kind of things, spending time, 10 minutes a day just reflecting on things, it becomes such an important part of their day. They can't actually go back to a position where they didn't do it. So it does take time to build that habit. And so I think that's really going to be a key role, as I said, for L&D, to help people build these new habits. It's not just like telling them they've got to do it, but actually being there on the ground, in the grassroots, helping people build these new habits.
Okay, and I guess a question from Victoria that's related to that. What are your thoughts on a learning-based approach to compensation, especially in the light of annual appraisals?
Well, I did talk about rewards, didn't I?
Yeah.
I think the reward comes from, it's up to the organisation to decide how that reward is, but I think that reward comes in terms of, if you demonstrate that you've been doing all this learning for yourself and your performance has increased and you can now do X, Y, Z because of it, and you can see that that's where your role's going to go and you're preparing for your role, I think that really should be considered to be an important part of, perhaps not necessarily monetary rewards, but promotion and other kinds of rewards. So I think we do need to see these new approaches embedded within all the other working practices, and not just see learning as some sort of activity that fits out of all working practices. So I think this is going to be an opportunity to really get in and start making some significant impact by bringing learning right into the heart of the business, rather than just seeing it as something that, you just go and get a course when you need it from time to time, or when we have to tell you how to do health and safety. But learning becomes the whole core of the business, continuous learning in particular.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Vivian around funding. I'm finding one of the hardest areas to overcome is funding for training. I'm looking towards grants and partnership training, swapping. Any comments on the idea of securing funding to help your employees in the modern workplace?
Well, as she goes on to say, I'm reading it here, the other areas around changing the culture, that learning isn't always a paid option. And she says she likes the idea of short periods a day mounting up. I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I think there's so much free out there. Okay, we tend to think that's not invented here, so it's not valid. But again, that's where L&D have a really important part to play, to find and perhaps source some of the new good stuff out there, curate it, for want of a better word, bring it in and make it available. So this is really worth, if you're in these areas, this is the kind of stuff that you might find useful. So it hasn't got to be a paid funded thing. There's so much you can do for free. I mean, every day I'm learning in these ways, and I'm not paying a dime to do it. It's all free. Everything I've learned is for free, from the stuff that people share about what they're doing, from all kinds of videos and other resources that I find. And even if you want to go on a course, then there's loads of MOOCs and other things that are free to take. So it doesn't mean actually more money. You can do an awful lot for very little nowadays.
Okay, that's great. And Julia asks, if L&D is operating the kind of concierge service you recommend, what is the line manager's role?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's going to be a supportive role to a line manager. Maybe it's the line manager comes first. If he or she can't help with support with a question, that's when you perhaps call in your learning concierge, your learning advisor. I think it's about working together and finding where the learning advisor can add value to what the manager does. I think it's going to be very important the manager himself or herself takes on much more of a people development role. So I don't think it's about, splitting it up. It's about how they can work together. And I think this is really going to be key, working with individual managers. How can I best support you? What can I do to support you in your people development or help your team with some of these new activities? So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's about working together.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Right, we are running out of time now. Just one question for me. When we began, Jane, I mentioned social learning and video-based learning and MOOCs. And of all the sort of technologies that we now have at our fingertips, what do you feel is the most important one for employees and employers to encourage their employees to take advantage of?
Well, I think the most key thing is personal learning tools. I don't know how many of you saw an article I wrote the other day, the Modern Professional Learners Toolkit, and basically it's made up of all the tools around that modern professional diagram I showed you back earlier on in the session. In other words, it's finding the things that suit you best, not necessarily enterprise tools, but the ones that any individual can find to support their own learning. And I think this is really the key. And for some, it might be social things like being part of a professional network, learning from others. For some, it will be perhaps going on courses. So it's going to be up to the individual. But there's so much out there. There's so many tools that can support the technologies that can support learning in many, many different ways that I really think it's up to the individual to choose the one that suits, or one or the many of them that suits them best. So there's no one technology, I think, that really is the key one, except perhaps the individual's brain, which is to make those decisions and to find the things to find things of value, to learn from them, and then to share.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jane, for your answers to the questions, and thanks to everyone for sending in those questions. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Coming up on Personnel Today in the next few weeks, we have a webinar on proving the business case for buying new software. Look out for the launch next month as well of the Personnel Today Awards 2017, which open for entries, and you may want to enter the Excellence in Learning and Development category. The deadline for entries is in June, so you've got 2 or 3 months to get your entries in. And don't forget also that April sees the introduction of the apprenticeship levy, so we have plenty of advice and resources going live on the site at the moment to help your organisation prepare for that. It just leaves me to thank my guest speaker, Jane Hart. Thank you, Jane, for such an engaging talk and for sharing your expertise on this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rob, for inviting me to speak today, and thanks to everybody for their interesting questions. They're all very valid, but I'm pleased to see that a lot of you want to try and push forward with this, so that's good news. So thanks again, Rob.
Our pleasure, and thank you to Skillsoft for supporting this afternoon's webinar, and thank you all for joining us and submitting your questions. You've been listening to a Personnel Today webinar in association with Skillsoft. Goodbye.